There wasn't a moment you agreed to this. No solemn vow, no conscious choice. It began long before you knew what choice even was, before you had words to resist, before you had the clarity to question. The race didn't begin at the office. It began in the crib. In that silent room where you were praised for being quiet, smiled at for being agreeable, rewarded not for truth, but for compliance. And somewhere between your first step and your first grade, you were given your first mask. Be good. Sit still. Don't talk back. It wasn't spoken as a command. It was woven into the way love was given, into the way attention was withheld, into the invisible metrics of being accepted. School was never just a place for learning. It was a soft prison wrapped in decoration. The bell rang not to inspire, but to regulate. The desk wasn't designed for freedom, but for control. You were trained to sit for hours, not to explore ideas, but to endure boredom. You weren't taught how to think, you were conditioned when to speak. Every minute, every subject, every hallway movement was monitored and measured. Foucault called it what it is, a court of discipline, a place not to elevate minds, but to manufacture docile bodies, little soldiers of structure, future employees of routine. And it worked, not through violence, but through normalization. Machiavelli understood this long before us, that the most powerful rulers no longer need swords. They only need stories. Stories about success, about respect, about being somebody. You don't fear a tyrant. You fear not fitting in. You fear the silence of exclusion more than the noise of control. So you learn to wear your chains like jewelry. You learn to compete without knowing why. You chase promotions, degrees, applause, not because you chose them, but because they were placed in front of you, and everyone else was running. Here's the truth most never slow down enough to hear. You didn't choose the rat race. You were chosen by it, selected, groomed, processed. You were handed a script before you knew you had a voice, a script that told you to be useful, to be impressive, to be predictable. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking the most important question: who am I? When I'm not being watched. This isn't conspiracy, this isn't paranoia, this is psychology, architecture, power. This is what happens when obedience becomes identity, when silence is mistaken for peace, when self-worth is outsourced to a system designed to keep you busy enough to forget your own mind. So take a breath. Not a shallow one, a real one. One that fills your chest like a rebellion. Because if you keep running without remembering who's pulling the strings, the race won't just tire you, it will consume you. You were never asked what you wanted to become, you were simply processed. But now, for the first time, we're going to look at the machine, and we're going to name what it made of you. There's a certain shame that never leaves you. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It tells you that no matter how hard you try, how fast you move, how much you achieve, it's still not enough. And the worst part is, you start to believe it. You run, not to arrive, but to avoid the voice that questions your worth. The betrayal didn't begin when you became an adult. It began much earlier. In the classroom, in your home, in the subtle exchanges where approval was rationed and performance was praised. You weren't loved for being, you were loved for behaving, and so you learned to trade pieces of yourself for affection. It's one of the cruelest illusions of modern life, that your value is measured by output, that rest is laziness, that softness is weakness, that silence is awkward. You internalized these codes before you could name them, and they shaped you, bent you, convinced you to suppress not just your anger, but your essence. You call it perfectionism, but it's not ambition. It's self-hatred wearing a disciplined face. It's the belief that if you just get everything right, maybe then you'll be allowed to exist without shame. But the bar keeps moving, and so you keep chasing. Machiavelli said, "He who controls perception controls the soul." You weren't trained to think freely. You were trained to obey convincingly, with a smile, with charm, with just enough authenticity to keep you functional, but never enough to make you sovereign. The system doesn't want rebels. It wants actors who believe their roles. So you became a master of performance, even to yourself. But the real wound isn't what they did to you. It's what you now do to yourself. The way you silence your doubts, the way you push away your exhaustion, the way you apologize for needing rest. You are not lazy. You are wounded. You are not confused. You are divided. There's a part of you that remembers who you were before you were programmed, before obedience became instinct. Imagine a lion raised in a cage of mirrors. Everywhere it looks, it sees only a hamster. It stops roaring. It starts spinning. Not because it lacks power, but because it no longer recognizes it. That's what this culture does. It reflects false images until you forget your shape. But the lion is still there, not dead, just waiting. There's a moment, late at night, when the noise dies down and something colder creeps in. Not fear, not panic, something quieter, a guilt for resting, a strange unease with stillness, as if stopping even for a breath means failure. You lie there, exhausted but alert, haunted by the tasks you didn't finish, the expectations you didn't meet. And underneath it all, the terrifying suspicion that your worth is slipping away the longer you stay still. This isn't just burnout. It's identity collapse. Somewhere along the way, movement became morality, action became safety. The system didn't just train your hands, it rewired your understanding of virtue. What once meant discipline and purpose was twisted into addiction and avoidance. Loyalty became submission, ambition became obsession, resilience became emotional numbness. You don't pause because you're disciplined, you pause because you're breaking, and even then, you apologize for the silence. You were told productivity is the path to peace, but the truth is brutal. You're not being productive, you're being distracted. Distracted from the collapse of a false identity, distracted from the question that silence always asks. Who am I if I'm not producing? That question terrifies you because the answer requires facing yourself. Not your resume, not your reputation, not your output. Just you. You've become like a soldier who keeps marching after the war has ended. Legs bleeding, back broken, mind detached, but still marching. Not because there's a cause, but because stopping means facing the fact that he never chose the war in the first place. You run not to win, but to outrun the realization that you've been fighting for a system that never saw you. Only your function, only your obedience, only your usefulness. And usefulness doesn't love you back, so you keep moving, because stopping might mean seeing the truth. And the truth, it doesn't flatter. It strips, it reveals the machinery, it reveals the mask, and beneath it a face you haven't truly looked at in years. But you are not a machine, you are not your metrics, you are not the pace that broke you. You are the one who remembers in stillness that you were never meant to run forever. We say we want freedom. We whisper it in journals, post it in captions, tattoo it into skin. But most of us are lying. Because the truth is, we crave familiar chains more than unfamiliar wings. Freedom sounds beautiful until you realize it demands exile, not from others, but from the identity you've spent your life performing. You were taught to fear dictators, but never questioned the one inside your own psyche. The one that punishes you for being still, that scolds you for speaking your truth, that measures your worth in applause and punishes your silence with self-loathing. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved." But what happens when that fear is internalized? When the tyrant isn't external but embedded? When the ruler is your inner critic and your rebellion begins with a whisper you were told to ignore? Foucault didn't just study power. He exposed it. He showed us that the most efficient systems of control don't require force. They only need normalization. Because once the rules are internalized, the prisoner guards his own cell. He follows the schedule. He punishes deviation. He becomes his own warden. You don't need a cage when the mind has been trained to fear the open door. And so we stay. We stay in jobs that kill our spirit, in roles that shrink our voice, in relationships that mirror our unworthiness. Not because we love it, but because we know how to survive it. Real freedom isn't a vacation. It's a crucifixion of the false self. It's the death of comfort, the burning of approval, the undoing of every mask we were taught to wear in exchange for love. Freedom doesn't feel good at first. It feels like loss, like exile, like loneliness, because to walk your own path, you must first walk away from the echo chamber, from the gaze, from the validation that once kept you breathing. And when the mask burns, when it truly burns, what's left is raw, unsure, trembling, but finally, yours. Freedom is not a door gently opening. It is a mask ripped from the face of obedience. And beneath it is the truth. You may not like who you see, but at least now, you are the one doing the seeing. You were conditioned to be a gear, a smooth, silent component in a machine that promised success, structure, and belonging. But what it never promised, what it never intended, was sovereignty. Because sovereign minds don't obey, they question, they resist. They slow down just enough to notice the cost of the race they never asked to join. And that noticing, that stillness, is heresy in a world built on speed. The ritual of obedience runs deep. It's not just in the schedules, it's in your self-talk, in your reflex to apologize for needing rest, in the way you shrink when you speak your truth. But rituals can be broken. And the first fracture begins not with rage, but with refusal. The refusal to keep turning, the refusal to keep pretending, the refusal to keep betraying yourself for a system that doesn't remember your name. Machiavelli's prince was not just a ruler, he was a symbol of psychological power. His first conquest was never land, it was the human mind. And in reclaiming your own mind, you are no longer a servant. You become sovereign, not over others, over your own being. And that is the first act of rebellion, not to destroy the world, but to stop letting it define you. Foucault whispered what few were ready to hear. Resistance isn't noise, it's clarity. It's remembering that you were not born to be watched, corrected, and measured. You were not born to fit in, to impress, to earn your worth. You were born to see. And once you see, really see, the blueprint of control written into your body, your thoughts, your silence, then the work begins, not to escape the system, but to unlearn it from your bones. There's a price to all of this. You will lose your image, your status, your easy conversations, but what you gain cannot be marketed, cannot be stolen. It is the only thing this world cannot counterfeit: authority over your soul. You were the sacrifice, but not anymore. Now you become the fire, not to flee the ritual, but to burn the altar it was built upon.